From the Digital Media Center on the campus of Southern Oregon University in Ashland, Oregon. This is Ramping Up Your English, an educational program for intermediate level English language learners. Here's your host for Ramping Up Your English, John Letts.
Welcome to Ramping Up Your English. Ramping Up Your English is for English language learners from all language backgrounds who have already begun the process of learning English as their second language. It's a program for people of all ages. If you're seeking greater English proficiency, this program is designed to help you reach that goal. Ramping Up Your English is a support program for English learners who already have passed the beginning stages of learning English. We take a content-based approach to helping you reach greater English proficiency. We use English to teach English. The theme of our first unit is trains and railroads. This is episode 17, segment 1. You're in for a great treat today. Riding the famous California Zephyr through Utah and Colorado, you're on schedule for seeing some of the greatest trackside scenery in the world. I can hardly wait to share the ride with you. Well, in fact, I can't wait any longer. Let's hop aboard for part 2 of Amtrak's California Zephyr eastbound. In part 1 of the California Zephyr, we departed from Sacramento to trace the Transcontinental Railroad in reverse. We climbed into the Sierra Nevada mountains, learning how the Central Pacific Railroad depended on Chinese work crews to build this end of the line. We passed beautiful but tragic Donner Lake and emerged into much drier Nevada. Following the Truckee River, we saw day turn to night in the Nevada desert. We awoke to some of the most spectacular scenery in America. They give this country the name Ruby Canyon for the deep red color of the rock. This is one place we're grateful to be on a train. Amtrak takes us through this red rock canyon country, following the California Zephyr route on the former Rio Grande Railroad, a true mountain railroad if ever there was one. We see a fantasy landscape here of palaces and sculptures made of stone. A fantasy landscape, only it's real, and we can take it all in without having to watch the road.
It's like being at Disneyland.
Yep, only it's real.
Sometimes it's very quiet on the train, and you can just look out the window and watch the scenery go by. We follow the Colorado River to Glenwood Springs, about to enter more breathtaking landscape. Pulling out of Glenwood Springs at mid-afternoon, we're headed to Glenwood Canyon, where a landslide in 2007 left passengers stranded for several hours. Here across the river is Interstate 70, reminding me how lucky I am to be on a train. And here we enter the magnificent Glenwood Canyon. These great views are from the dining car. You can hear my wife talking to fellow passengers.
We came a couple of years ago at this time of year. We got off at Glenwood Springs. And kind of just were tourists around Glenwood Springs.
How far are you going?
Washington, D.C.
The train stopped here while we kept eating. Outside the train, we watched this magpie.
So the rest of us don't have to say we don't want to see no.
It was noticeably more quiet when we went back to our roomette and enjoyed this view of the Colorado. At this elevation, you can see ice forming on the edges of the river. One of my favorite views is of the train itself. The higher we rose in elevation, the more ice we saw in the river. These are the Rocky Mountains. This ski resort led right into the mouth of the huge Moffat Tunnel. On the other side of that 6-mile tunnel, there were more mountains. We joined other passengers in the viewing car for this scenery. Suddenly, we're looking down at the edge of the Great Plains. Many people consider the California Zephyr the most scenic train in the United States. I say it's a toss-up with the Coast Starlight. As we pull into Denver, our second day on the California Zephyr is drawing to a close. We'll leave Denver in the dark, passing coal trains through the night.
Rolling into Denver.
Welcome back to Ramping Up Your English. We're learning English while enjoying a video about trains. You just got to see some of the best railroad scenery in the country. The Rio Grande Railroad chose the rugged Rocky Mountains as their territory to compete against Southern Pacific. In the freight hauling business, they matched Southern Pacific's long, sometimes slow trains with short, fast ones. When it came to passenger service, the three railroads, Burlington, Rio Grande, and Western Pacific, developed the greatest of streamliners to attract passengers back to the rails. These trains had dome cars for viewing more of the mountain scenery. Their message to travelers was clear. The journey was the destination, the real vacation, a heritage carried on by Amtrak today. We'll learn more about mountain railroading and how to use English to describe it when we return. This is a Ramping Up Your English book review. If you're enjoying our theme of trains and railroads, you might want to check out a catalog from Historic Rail. Their free catalog is aimed mostly at model railroad enthusiasts, but I found some treasures in here worth spending a few dollars on. Sometimes I don't order anything, but I still enjoy the pictures of trains from railroads that no longer exist. This cover features the Burlington Northern, the railroad that pulled the California Zephyr from Chicago to Denver. You can order a model engine or artwork of Burlington Northern, this passenger train pulling into the station. Some pages are devoted to a single railroad, like the Great Northern, whose Empire Builder route is now operated by Amtrak, or the Santa Fe, with its distinctive war bonnet that's designed on its locomotive. Passengers on Amtrak Southwest Chief are retracing the route of the Chief, a famous route operated in the past by Santa Fe railroads. Model railroading is a hobby that's too expensive for me, but I've enjoyed videos, books, and t-shirts that I've ordered over the years. Visitors can visit their website. A book review on a catalog? Why not? I'm John Letts. Welcome back to Ramping Up Your English, a support program for intermediate level English learners. You can watch and download this program and others by visiting archive.org/details/roadtv. Choose Ramping Up Your English from the sidebar or choose my name, John Letts. You can see this program on Channel 15 in Ashland and Channel 182 on Charter Cable. It's on at 8 a.m. Mondays and 7:30 p.m. on Thursdays. This is episode 17, segment 2. We have a saying in English, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And that's never been so true as when trying to communicate the awesome beauty we see from the California Zephyr crossing the Rocky Mountains. Here are a few tips on using English to convey at least part of this jaw-dropping scenery. We could say that the California Zephyr travels through big mountains, deep canyons, and forests during the old Rio Grande route, and that accurately sums up the terrain we saw in part 2. However, we can ramp up our use of adjectives as well as certain nouns and verbs to better provide us a picture in the mind of our reader or listener. Now let's start with Ruby Canyon. The landscape there was layered with rock of different colors. The erosion had formed odd shapes in the landscape, resembling huge buildings like palaces and castles. Let's use some words to make a description that will tell your reader why this landscape made you feel so much awe in this place. Now we can use action words here, tower, heap, and uplift, size words, grand, towering, soaring, and shape words, cathedrals, palaces, pyramids, sheer walls, and layered, curvaceous, how's that for a word? Color words, we can use beige, dusky, amber, vanilla, vermilion, ochre, rose, ruby, because all of these things were there, right? So let's put some of these together in a way that paints a picture in the mind of the native English speaker. We passed along sheer walls of ruby-colored canyons. The landscape towered above the train, confronting our vista with cathedrals and palaces of ochre stone. The ground was uplifted into pyramid forms here, showing layer upon layer of rich color. We saw bands of beige atop those of rose, vanilla, vermilion, turmeric, and finally covered with a dusky rose hue. These colorful bands were heaped upon each other, forming castles around one bend, then diminished to small pyramids around the next. We had to crane our necks at times in hopes of seeing the summit of these giant, imposing features. Other times, our vision was funneled to bright uprises and broad canyons in the distance. So, we've used some very descriptive imagery and some very specific vocabulary to describe Ruby Canyon and the surrounding area. The shape words we used are easy enough to learn, but the color words, that's another matter. Now, one suggestion for finding color beyond the primary colors a beginner uses is to use one of these paint chips that you might find in the section of a home improvement store. Take a look at the color chips, the cards they show available for the colors of their paint. Look at the names assigned to these hues, and you'll find there are scores of ways to say yellow or red, for example. Now let's picture the section of the California Zephyr's route east of Glenwood Springs. The train here travels through the majestic Glenwood Canyon, following every twist and turn of the Colorado River far below the level of the tracks. So we have some action words here again. We have soar, tower, sprawl, some shape words, sheer rock face, canyon, steep, deeply eroded, chiseled out, bare, chasm, ribbon of water, craggy, sprawled, bowl-shaped. We have descriptive words here, frozen, iced over, bare, naked, frosted, translucent, etched along the edges, frozen blanket, stretching, steep, and some color words, bright, white, blushed, milky colored, amber, and turmeric. Now this is the entrance to Glenwood Canyon, so this is what we're describing here. The amber-colored sheer rock soared skyward from the train window. Its craggy face towered above the train, guarding the deep canyon that lay ahead. A scattering of cone-shaped trees brought life to these vertical slopes. The river that had once been barely below the level of the train soon dropped downward, running like a ribbon of water in a deepening canyon far below the side of the tracks. The clear water formed ice along the steep banks that was milky colored in its thin parts and bright white where it was thick. Now and then a naked aspen tree stood like a skeleton along the river. The ribbon of river now filled a deep chasm, more ice etched along its distant banks. The translucent icy shoulders intruded further into the stream, at times bridging across the clear, moving water. Finally, we came over a rise and the land sprawled out, stretching suddenly to distant peaks, forming a kind of high-altitude bowl. Here, the river leveled off as well and was covered completely at times with frozen crust and still pools in others. With some descriptive words beyond the basic words of a beginner, you can ramp up your description to better communicate what you saw in the video clips of the California Zephyr during the section that runs between Utah and Colorado. So how do you get command of such words? Well, you've already started by watching this program. Reading about trains and railroads as well as watching videos about them can expand your vocabulary. As you see and hear words like these used to describe special landscapes, you'll become more confident in using these descriptions when you speak or write. I've posted a list of these words as well as these sentences on my website. Go to letscreate.org and click on the episode 17 link. You can also click on the link to repeat the video clip we saw in part 1. And that's all for segment 2. We'll return with segment 3 right after this. This is a Ramping Up Your English book review. If you've taken an interest in the theme of trains and railroads, you can grow that interest with Trains magazine. This is for the serious rail fan or just anyone who loves trains. Each issue has a main theme, this one about Western steam engines clearing the tracks of snow and ice. Since the featured events were for photographers, there are incredible pictures in this special winter and holiday issue. This issue also features Union Station in Kansas City, a beautifully remodeled historic train station served by Amtrak's Southwest Chief during its nighttime run between Chicago and Los Angeles. Trains magazine is also a good source of finding railroad museums closest to your home. If you want to know more, visit their website. I found my copy at a newsstand and I just couldn't resist buying it. This has been a Ramping Up Your English book review. I'm John Letts. Welcome back to Ramping Up Your English, a support program for English learners who want to increase their level of English proficiency. If that's you, you're in the right place. This is episode 17, segment 3. In part 2 of our journey eastward aboard the California Zephyr, we crossed the sublime landscape of the Rocky Mountains and followed the Colorado River, taking us to Denver right as the sun went down. In part 3, we'll continue on the Burlington section of the route. As you watch, note the ways in which the landscape is different from the section we featured in the first segment of this episode. Let's climb aboard the California Zephyr for the final section eastbound into Chicago. We ended our second day on Amtrak's California Zephyr in Denver. After miles of fantastic scenery, crews cleaned the windows while the train is being serviced. We had come from Sacramento 2 days before, and now we were on the final stretch to Chicago. The snowstorm we'd followed in the Rocky Mountains had left a white blanket across the flat landscape. This was day 3 on the California Zephyr. When day broke, we were in Nebraska. Trees were bare and the snow was everywhere, but it didn't seem too deep. This is rural America, the land of farms and small towns. It's the railroad that turned these grasslands into America's breadbasket. We could still see the stubble of last year's crops as we passed field after field. The morning started quiet. The spectacular scenery of the past 2 days was behind us now. No soaring mountain peaks or deep canyons here, yet this land, asleep under the snow, had its own beauty. Crossing into the state of Iowa didn't bring much change in the landscape. If anything, it was flatter.
There they are.
We did see something different crossing into Illinois. We stopped chewing our lunch long enough to gaze out at the mighty Mississippi River, a wide
Must
river
be.
even this far north.
Okay, we are crossing the Mississippi River right here. Oh, look at that old, old barge hulk there. I didn't know it was this wide, this far up. I know in Louisiana it's like a mile across.
It was like we barely got our car on this little ferry, and they just kind of pulled us across and rode across, and it was like, now you get off.
You told the kids the whole one.
And I remember doing that.
We chatted with our lunch companions, this being the last time we would get a chance to do so. This was the last meal on the train before Chicago.
We're going into Mississippi.
Attention, ladies and gentlemen, this is Johnny Kirsten speaking as we cross the beautiful Mississippi River as we're about to cross into Illinois. This will be last call for lunch in the dining car. If you desire to have lunch in our dining car, please come at this time. Once again, this is last and final call for lunch in the dining car. If you desire to have lunch in our dining car, please come at this time. Once again, there are no reservations needed. We're on a first come, first served basis. Once again,
Well, when I was up here,
last call for lunch in the dining
and
car.
I started seeing the brochures of
Somebody said we don't.
the riverboats. That's on my list to do.
Yeah.
Those riverboat trips.
We did one on the Columbia River from Astoria, Oregon, up to Lewiston, Idaho, and back to Astoria. It was a big paddle wheel steamship.
We've seen it. We went on a different kind of boat, but it was doing the river still.
We did a small ship
I
cruise.
don't know if that one still runs or not.
It closed for a while, but a lot of things have come back, or other people have bought them.
One more train.
Because we were on Cruise West, and all their
Well, they
boats
had an accident. They ran it aground. I think that's what.
went to Alaska.
Yeah.
Well, I do know a lot of the tour boats on the Columbia closed because gas prices were so high.
Oh.
That got a lot of them.
And then with this recession, a lot fewer people are doing that kind of thing.
Approaching Chicago, we passed through many small communities, their main streets parallel to the railroad tracks.
There was a Starbucks.
I saw a bakery.
Inside Chicago's city limits, we had to adjust to this very urban landscape.
It's probably a project.
There, shut.
Here's the shot you want.
Yep.
Easing into Chicago, we saw lots of Amtrak cars on the rails.
I got one with the train in it for you.
We seemed to be heading right into the Sears building, or I should say under the Sears building. We're actually going under Union Station here.
Okay, mine's away.
Our spectacular 3-day journey was over. We got off the California Zephyr in the darkness of the Union Station Underground. We'd arrived in Chicago, as far east as the California Zephyr goes. I hope you enjoyed the ride on the California Zephyr. Welcome back to Ramping Up Your English. We're using the themes of trains and railroads in a content-based approach to help intermediate English learners ramp up their English to a higher level of proficiency. A couple of historical notes before we go. When Amtrak took over passenger service in 1971, the Rio Grande Railroad refused to go along. So while Burlington and Western Pacific gave up their ends of the California Zephyr, the Rio Grande ran a passenger service between Denver and Salt Lake City. They called it the Rio Grande Zephyr. It was a beautiful train, but they couldn't afford to keep running it, and a few years later they gave it up to Amtrak. You can see historical footage of the California Zephyr on the PBS series American Experience. I have a link to their episode Streamliners on my website. Visit letscreate.org, where you'll also find our own program about Streamliners. Go to the episode 6 page. I also have a link to the American Experience program on the Transcontinental Railroad. Everything's changed since the days of the California Zephyr and those days before Amtrak. The Burlington Railroad merged with the Northern Pacific and the Great Northern to become the Burlington Northern. Then they merged with the Santa Fe Railroad to become one of the few railroad giants left in the United States, BNSF, which means Burlington Northern Santa Fe. The Rio Grande Railroad merged with rival Southern Pacific and soon disappeared, although some of their rolling stock can still be seen on the rails today. Southern Pacific merged with Union Pacific, another of the few giant railroads still operating in the United States. The Western Pacific was bought out by the Union Pacific back in 1983. Some of their rolling stock can be seen at various railroad museums across the western United States. Now, this episode is also history. That's all for segment 3 of episode 17 of Ramping Up Your English. I want to thank my awesome crew who volunteer their time and talents to make this program possible, my announcer, Bob Ayers, and I want to thank you, our viewers. See you next time on RVTV Voices for Ramping Up Your English. I'm John Letts.
You've been watching Ramping Up Your English, a support program for intermediate-level English language learners. Learn more. Visit our website at letscreate.org. You can also watch or download today's program at archive.org/details/roadtv. Join us next time on RVTV Voices for Ramping Up Your English.